Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. We have speakers from around the world. We have an audience from around the world. We had a very high registration for this session titled Global Patient Engagements Across Regional and Regulatory Boundaries. So we spent 1 hour and 30 minutes together. And before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself as the moderator and then remind a couple of housekeeping rules before actually we get started with our very rich and promising panel. So I'm Nicholas Brook. I'm from PFMD, the Patient Focused Medicine Global Platform. We have been looking at developing patient engagement best practices for 5 years, and actually regulators are obviously one of the key drivers for change in improving patient engagement, and through that improving outcomes for patients and for all stakeholders in the health systems. So before we get started, just some housekeeping rules. Next slide, please. We are, of course, very happy to see you. And so just quickly, please keep your microphones muted. We will record the session. Feel free to engage the discussion through the Q&A. We will have a first round of discussion and open the Q&A from there. And then ask questions, comments, everything you want. So we'll get started. The first, if we look at the agenda for our session today. So basically, we'll have 3 main discussions topics. The first one, we will give the opportunity to our representative of the most engaged regulatory agencies on patient engagement and ICH. And basically, we'll ask them to tell us a bit more about their perspective in terms of patient engagement. We'll have a second topic about how to turn patient insights and patient involvement into data that can support decision process, regulatory decision process, but maybe beyond regulatory as well. And we finally will cover how patient engagement actually has been deployed during the crisis, the global health crisis we are facing right now, but maybe also what were the pitfalls or the issues that were highlighted by the crisis we are facing. And so we will have that for the first hour, and then we'll engage in the Q&A. From the second topic, you can already ask your question, and if we are well on time, I will actually bring your questions to the panelists from the second topic on this agenda. So now let's get started and present our panelists. If I can go to the next slide, thank you very much. So we would have Lenita Lindstrom from ICH, Assembly Chair and Senior Expert. She will talk to us about how ICH is embracing patient engagement and reviewing some of their major guidances and the way they work with patients. We will have Robin Bent, Director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the FDA. She will actually bring to the table the quite robust work and fast-moving activities from FDA in the last few years. We will have Juan Garcia from EMA, where he's heading public and stakeholder engagement, and basically we'll discuss a little bit about not a turning point, because EMA is recognized for its patient engagement for a while, but actually what would be next. And it seems that quite some things are coming in the next few months or years. And finally, Daisaku Sato, Chief Management Officer and Associate Center Director for Regulatory Science at PMDA, the Japanese regulatory agencies, which has also started very interesting work in engaging with patients in the last few years. And basically, together with our 4 panelists, the goal is really to get a perspective on what are the key trends, the key milestones that regulators are taking around the world and what's next. And so that's what we will be discussing today. So let me, if we can get to the next slide, please. So first topic, we will ask each of our panelists to introduce himself or herself and actually as a role in the organization, but also what will be the personal interest in patient engagement. And to give us a little bit a kind of overview of what happened in the last few years and actually where you think we are going, what are the learnings and where you think we are going in the next few years. So let's start with Juan Garcia from EMA. Juan, the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself, why this topic is important to you, and then a little EMA perspective, please.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, and good afternoon, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think we would like to thank for organizing this interesting discussion, which having involved key players who are actually working on patient engagement. And I think it's a great opportunity to reflect, as you say, a little bit on the past, but also try to see we are looking ahead and to ensure that we have sufficient synergies on this. So my name is Juan García Burgos. I'm head of public and stakeholders engagement at the agency, and this is the department which is dealing with interaction with patients and healthcare professionals and other stakeholders. And I have been directly involved on the development of the agency's framework for interaction with patients and consumers as well. And as you saw, the agency was created in 1995, but I think we feel very proud that from the very beginning, we engage with patients, we have started to work with them. And this has been a long journey for many years, in which I think there has been a huge transformation overall, and it's a huge transformation within the agency, but at the same time outside on the way that patients has been more and more contributing to all kind of development and regulatory activities of medicines. As I said, we started working immediately with patients, and I think I have to say it was not proactively. We were listening to their call. I think it was mainly HIV patients, which at the beginning we called more even activists at the time, because they were maybe coming to really knocking at our doors and asking to be involved. This, let's say, was quite a shock for many regulators. And it was a very pleasant and positive shock in the sense that they came directly to contribute to the regulatory discussions. They directly were involved in core elements and discussions that came up with good recommendations. So this positive feedback, this positive experience gave the grounds for further development. We then started looking at European level at organizations which were representing patients in different areas, and we came up with a working group which came with a lot of recommendations that has been, like, let's say, a framework for the current model of interaction we have. So when we now look at our activities, because this has been developed over time, I think the question is in which activities at EMA patients can participate. I think when we look at across the life cycle of a medicine, I think we cannot identify now a single activity where patients don't have a say. We involve patients at product-related evaluations, but at every level. We involve in the different committees, in the pediatric committees, in orphans. We involve in the PRAC, which is the safety committee for sure, and even in the CHMP, which is the committee responsible for making recommendations for authorization in Europe. This committee, the legislation didn't foresee at the time patient participation, but we have found ways to ensure that even the legislation that at the time it was written didn't support this. We have aligned with other committees and they still provide input and participate. So as I said, there is no single activity where they are not involved. In addition to involvement at the level of product-related evaluations, the patients are involved in policy decisions. They're involved whenever we have, for example, new legislation and we have to implement. We have extensive dialogue with them. And I think it's so now demonstrated that they add value. They help us identifying early issues or concerns that maybe can be easily mitigated earlier rather than having maybe delays or problems at the later stage. So we have a lot of examples of success with that. And I think one of the positive, let's say, learnings or findings is that maybe if there were some regulators in the past which were skeptical about the value of the patients can give to the different activities, and maybe concerned about the overburden that they can impose to the activity, making it more complex or more cumbersome, I think all these issues has been now managed properly and overcome. And I think we feel pretty satisfied how this is working. We are constantly evaluating new methodologies. We are trying new ways in which, and this is a dynamic process. And for example, we can refer to the public hearing that we have in the context of safety reviews a couple of years ago, and which was new for us. For example, in the FDA, they have their own mechanisms for that, but for us, it was new, and it has again been a very successful experience and a very positive one, which has given us a lot of learnings to continue improving the ways that we involve them. I think when looking ahead, the main, and we can discuss this, I don't want to extend too much because I'm sure there will be questions. Which are the main challenges we are facing is maybe how to ensure that patients have adequate training, have adequate support, because it is essential, it's critical in order to ensure that they can give a very good contribution to these activities. But at the same time, how to really to ensure we can still approach to patients who really represents the interest of patients, and we don't want maybe very professionalized patients. So to have a very good balance about that is critical, and that's something that we are investing a lot. And then again, as I said, we have focused our model of interaction on having patients involved in regulatory activities, in assessment, while I think a lot of focus are being given now at global level in having patient experience data already been generated and collected at the time of drug development, and how this can be supporting decision making afterwards. And I think, yeah, we have a lot of good experience and good work which has been done by other regions, by FDA, for example. ICH as well is working on this matter, and I'm looking forward to listen to Bent and Benita on that. And I think maybe it's important that we keep collaboration internationally, because I think this issue is very, very global, and I think of course every region has its differences, and they have to develop things according to the specific needs. But I think there is a need to work all together and to ensure that, whatever we come out, different guidance can be applied globally and not regional. So I think maybe I will stop here, and maybe we will have ample time to discuss and to answer to questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan. So for the audience, Juan will be leaving us at the end of the hour, because urgent and important meeting came in. And actually, please already ask your question in the Q&A, and I will make sure that we give Juan the opportunity to answer a couple of them before he leaves. So please start asking your question there. So Daisaku Sato, so would you please introduce yourself and your interest in patient engagement, and then describes how PMDA is actually embracing patient engagement for a couple of years now, and what's coming next?
Yes, thank you very much, Nicholas, and good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be invited to this very important panel discussions with patient. And I'm Japanese regulator. I'm Daisaku Sato from PMDA. And so I have been working in this Japanese regulatory agency for 28 years. And now I'm in the Chief Management Officer of PMDA. So we have launched the internal working group for patient participation in PMDA. So it was last year. So we move in this new endeavor to make a good relationship with patient. And we have several layers of patient activities in PMDA. Our main activity is drug review and drug pharmacovigilance. However, we have a ADR relief system. This is a compensation system for patients who had a serious adverse drug reactions. So this is a kind of payment system for the patient. PMDA operates this a kind of compensation system now. And also, back to the 15 years ago, we have started to take up the opinions from patients, particularly for drug development, unmet medical needs. So as you know, Japan is a country sometimes a little bit berated drug development compared to US and European unions. Sometimes 3 years to 5 years gap between the approval timing between US, EU, and Japan. So we take up the request from the patient to accelerate approvals to fill in the gap of the treatment for the patient. This is over the last 15 years activities. And now, we under the new working group of PMDA, we started to communicate more proactively with patients. First, we collect the adverse event information directly from patient. This is a kind of patient-reported outcome. And also, we provide the education activities for the patient group to make them understand better the drug regulations in Japan. And also, we will now preparing the guidance document that will be shared by PMDA and also patient group to how to interact drug regulations and how to communicate between regulator and patient. So we are seeking the effective way and systematic way to collect opinions and knowledge scientific input from patient. One of our key challenges to react the patient-reported outcomes that can be used in the drug development. So we are following the development of US FDA and also European unions and seeking more systematic way of correcting patient experiences. So in the meantime, we have been facing no serious problem using the patient-reported outcomes, but in some cases we are expecting how to interpret patient experience and outcomes under the Japanese culture and the Japanese clinical environment when we conducting the multi-regional clinical trials. So, and also we started many communications with our stakeholders, and one thing is the Ppi Consortium Japan. This is a patient consortium that was established last July in 2019, and we started to collaborate with these consortium for providing UPATIS tools in the Japanese. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisako. So let's move on to Robin from FD. Robin, FD has been driving quite some important changes, and I can see from the Q&A already that pointing on the fact that FDA is setting expectation about other stakeholders to generate data when filing the new molecules. Could you present yourself briefly and share a little bit basically what you have done in the last few years and what are the learnings and where you are going next?
Sure, thank you. I would be happy to. And just as a point of clarification, I am the director of patient-focused drug development within the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, not the director of the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. But with that being said, I just wanted to say good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, or good evening. I'm very happy to be able to join you today to really discuss FDA's efforts on patient engagement, or more specifically on patient-focused drug development. Similar to what my colleague Juan mentioned earlier, FDA has been very involved in patient engagement essentially back since the beginning of HIV. But right today I'm going to speak a little more specifically on the patient-focused drug development initiative. So my background is in nursing, and I've been a nurse for over 20 years, and much of that time was spent working in pediatric oncology, both in direct care as well as in the design, conduct, and oversight of clinical trials. And I continue to practice nursing when I'm not at FDA. So when the opportunity came for me to be part of FDA's patient-focused drug development initiative, I really jumped at it because I think it's just something that's really important. And I really strongly believe that including the patient voice in drug development is not only important, but it really creates better science. And so one of my favorite parts of my work at FDA are our patient-focused drug development meetings. And that's because I never fail to learn something from these meetings. If you're not familiar with these meetings, they're public meetings where instead of FDA and other medical experts talking, we're listening, and the patient experts are talking. And they talk about their disease and their condition. Their caregivers also share their experiences. They talk about the impacts, how their condition impacts their daily lives and the lives of their families. They talk about the burden of symptoms and the burden of the treatments. They provide us with a snapshot of their daily life, and they also share with us their thoughts on clinical trial participation. And FDA experts, such as our clinical reviewers, listen and ask clarifying questions. And this information really helps provide the therapeutic context, which is really important for us to hear as we're performing our benefit risk assessments of medical products. But one thing that we learned from these patient-focused drug development meetings that we didn't really expect to learn, but was very helpful for us to know, was that that sometimes the things that we're measuring in clinical trials aren't the things that matter to the patients. And so because of that, FDA realized that we needed to really kind of build on the narrative of the patient-focused drug development meetings and work to better incorporate the patient voice earlier and throughout the drug development process. And so one way we're doing that is through the development of our methodologic guidance series, four guidances really focused on patient-focused drug development that helps drug developers and patient groups really understand what we're looking for. And so the first of the documents is titled Collecting Comprehensive and Representative Input, and it talks about sampling methods that can be used when planning a study to collect patient input, and provides a general overview on the relationship between potential research questions and methods when deciding from whom to get input, including defining target populations in the development of the sampling strategy. And that was just finalized in June. The second document, which has been published in draft, really discusses FDA's current thinking on methods for eliciting information from patients, the patients identified in Guidance 1, and really presenting a range of methods and best practices to identify what's important to patients with respect to burden of disease, burden of treatment, and the benefits and risks in the management of the patient's disease. The third guidance document will discuss refining a list of concepts of interest important to patients, caregivers, and clinicians that can be the third document will assess the addressing refining the list of concepts of interest important to patients for measurement. And we understand that not everything identified as important by patients can be measured as part of an investigational treatment. And this guidance really addresses the issues related to selecting what to measure, as well as the identification or development of fit-for-purpose clinical outcome assessments to assess these outcomes. And then the fourth guidance will address topics related to incorporating these clinical outcome assessments into endpoints for regulatory decision-making. And so one thing that we've really learned throughout this process is we're working really hard to generate a series of documents that are a little bit different from the FDA, the traditional FDA guidance documents that are really targeted towards drug developers. These guidance documents are really that we're developing are targeted towards a broader range of stakeholders, including patient organizations and others, which isn't to say that we think that every organization has the time or the resources to take on all of the efforts that are outlined in the guidance documents. But we hope that these documents will provide everybody with a working familiarity with the processes. And so moving forward, as these documents become finalized, we hope to provide some additional resources or trainings. In addition, we've launched a program to fund the development of standard core sets of clinical outcome assessments and their related endpoints for specific conditions or domains. And these sets, which are developed with significant input from patients and patient groups, as well as input from external technical advisory committees, will reflect endpoints that are important to patients and will be available at nominal cost or free of charge for use in clinical trials. And we're really excited because we're about to review our second set of grant applications. And we're also really excited about just moving forward with the inclusion of the patient voice throughout the drug development process and continue to look for opportunities to improve our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. We will have plenty of points to discuss. The question in the Q&A are starting, and I will try to capture them in the next step of the discussion. Lenita, ICH is also embracing has started to embrace patient engagement, and a lot of things are happening. And I think you are working on key pieces of work on the existing guidance that you have. Can you comment a little bit on that, and first start with your introduction and personal interest in patient engagement?
Thank you very much, Nicolas, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and a big thank you to the organizers for having invited me to participate in this panel discussion. It's truly a great pleasure to give you a little bit the perspective of ICH. Now, many of you might be familiar with ICH, but those who are not, ICH stands for the International Council for Harmonization. And what we are trying to harmonize is the technical requirements for pharmaceuticals for human use. And actually, this is a very important year for ICH because we are celebrating the 30th anniversary, because ICH was initially set up in 1990 between the regulators and the innovator industry in the European Union, the United States, and Japan. A lot of things have happened since then. And actually, we are now also celebrating the 5th anniversary since the reform of ICH. So in 2015, after several years of discussions, ICH was set up as an independent legal entity under Swiss law. And it underwent a major changes that basically in terms of its governance, so putting more regulators in the driving seat when it came to adoption of guidelines, also putting the financial stability on a more sound basis, also by obtaining contributions from regulators to finance ICH and be less dependent on the previous industry funding. The reform also entailed increased transparency. And you will indeed find today much more information available on the ICH website, including not only about the different guidelines that have been adopted, but also about the working groups and the composition of those working groups. So the names of the experts that are participating in the harmonization efforts. And last but not least, a major change was that the membership and observership of ICH became open. So it became very clear that ICH during its first 10 years of existence became very successful with the development of some 50 harmonized guidelines. Today we have approximately 70 guidelines. So quite an intensive activity took place during the first 10 years. And obviously, some of these guidelines have become relatively old by now, and they are being revised as science moves along. And the intention is really to ensure that those guidelines keep up with the scientific developments. So today, what does ICH look like? Well, I'm pleased to say we are 17 members and 32 observers. So we have now a range of different regulatory authorities from around the globe who are participating in our activities. We have also global industry associations. And we also have a possibility for the observership for international organizations. And I must say, yes, as the chair of the assembly, it is of course with regret that we know that we currently don't have any international organization representing patients. This is of course something that we would like to see change in the future, because we do see a great value in having also the voice of patients being at the table at the ICH meetings. So the requirements for an organization to be able to become an observer in ICH is that it would need to be international, so truly global. But for the rest, I think the requirements are not very high, and we would certainly very much welcome to see in the near future an international, and perhaps several even international patient organizations participate in ICH meetings. We are holding meetings twice a year, currently, of course, all in virtual context. We have some approximately 30 active working groups which are working on either new guidelines or a revision of existing guidelines. And just to finalize my short introduction, to say that indeed there's been a major change, especially in the field of clinical trials. So one of the key guidelines of ICH is the ICH E6 on GCP, good clinical practice. And it became very evident several years ago, after the reform of ICH, that the especially comments coming from patient representatives and academia, saying to ICH, well, listen, your E6 guideline and other related guidelines are not fit for purpose any longer, because the way clinical trials are conducted today is quite different compared to the time when the E6 was being developed. And because of these discussions that we entered into with patient representatives and academia, this led to what is now called the GCP Renovation. So this was a document that was adopted in 2017. It's a reflection paper that you will find on the ICH website. And it actually outlines the need to have another look at these, notably the E6 guideline, but prior to that also the E8 guideline, which is the general considerations for clinical trials. Because indeed things have changed, and clinical trials are conducted in a different way these days, and it's considered simply that those ICH guidelines are no longer fit for purpose. So this guideline, this GCP renovation, has led to a revision of the E8 guideline with a certain sequencing was being outlined in this renovation paper, and now we've started with the revision of the actual E6 guideline. And in doing so, we have also introduced an engagement plan with stakeholders. So about a year ago, in October, there was a big meeting hosted by the FDA in the United States, to which we had invited different stakeholders, essentially from patient groups and academia, to discuss the ongoing work in ICH. And you will find information on the ICH website about the outcome of that meeting. And I'm also happy to say that in Europe, there was a meeting hosted by the European Medicines Agency, involving the working party of the patients and consumers, and also the healthcare professionals. And this meeting took place on the 3rd of June, where we were seeking also input from European patient and healthcare professional representatives. So ICH indeed is engaged now more with patients compared to before, and we will continue to do so. This is very much in line with our device, which you will again find on our website, which is harmonization for better health. And better health meaning, of course, better health for patients. That's why we are here for. And again, as I said, we hope in the future to see international patient organizations as observers in ICH, but in the meantime, we continue to engage with patients through other means, essentially at regional level, because we have to recognize that the way in which regulators interact with patients varies a lot between the different regions. And a very, very final very recent development is indeed activities, another reflection paper, which is expected to be published very soon, again on patient-focused drug development, which can potentially in the future lead also to ICH guidelines in this area. So this particular topic will be discussed by the ICH Assembly meeting in a few weeks' time. And if adopted by the Assembly, which is expected, another reflection paper in this area will be published also on the ICH website. So with this, I will stop and looking forward to having an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lenita. So it's quite clear when we hear all of you that patient engagement is moving fast in your organization, and how you will actually turn to the external world to work with your organizations. One of the key challenges of patient engagement is to make sure we still take patient inputs and bring that within a scientific process and a decision process. And so it's how to turn data, or how to turn, anecdotes, individual experiences and personal experiences into data that can support qualitative or quantitative data that can support a decision process. So when we look at that, and I was hearing your introduction, and Daisaku, it's clear that for the last 2 years you have started to engage with patients, and your focus as an agency is to work with patients at this stage. What will be, since it's still early days, what is your journey in learning from this relationship that you build with patients and turning patient input into data, scientific data, and data that you can use for your decision process? Can you comment on that?
Yes, thank you very much, Nicholas. And we have started the working group activities for the patients at PMDA for last 2 years. And we think there's very strong potentials to use the patient-reported outcomes and patient scientific knowledge to the to evaluate the efficacy or safety of clinical trials. And we are seeking systematic approach how to correct the patient knowledge and the patient output to these drug development process. And so we have discussed the patient groups, and we have very enlightened as well, and also perhaps in a couple of years' time, we will develop some guidelines or guidance how to communicate the patient groups to take up their scientific knowledge that can be used in the drug development. So in that process, we will learn from what has been done in US and also in Europe, and perhaps we will need some more communication with the industry stakeholders. Mainly now, the industry stakeholders are using the patient opinions when they design clinical trials in the clinical endpoints, and we think the communication with patient and also the industry, the 3 parties communication is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daisaku. Robin, on your side, you have been working on designing these guidances that you have mentioned, focusing mainly on clinical outcome assessments and PROs. But there is a very, very clear statement from FDA that data, patient experience data, beyond these, the 2 I just mentioned, COAs and PROs, including qualitative data, is actually expected at submission. So can you tell us a bit more about what's the response you get in practice, and what is the internally and externally the learnings that you can share about these guidances and the success and adoption they meet to date, at least?
Yes, we have a little experience of interacting with patients.
Daisaku, it was a question to Robin. Sorry to interrupt you.
Sorry.
Sure. Thanks so much. I think that it's pretty clear that that FDA does feel like that patient experience data is important. I think that in 2019, about 85% of the applications that were received in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research included patient experience data, which is up from the year before, and it continues to trend upward with kind of a majority of the patient experience data we receive coming from patient-reported outcome measures, followed by data received from clinician-reported outcome measures. And I think that all of this is really, I mean, it's great. I think that it doesn't really necessarily capture the big picture. And I think that, you know, there's a growing acknowledgement that not all clinical outcome assessments, even patient-reported outcome measures, necessarily reflect the outcomes of importance to patients if they weren't developed with input from patients. And I know that there are a lot of great groups around the globe that are working on this, as are we, and there are multiple programs that FDA is involved in, including Ppi Consortium and the Standard Core COA grant program that I talked about earlier, that are kind of trying to address this. But I also want to point out that the information that we see in the applications doesn't necessarily always reflect all of the patient engagement activities that are being undertaken by medical product developers. You know, there's a lot of places, as Juan mentioned earlier, that patients really can contribute, whether it's in the design and conduct of clinical trials, whether it's patient groups, or patients can assist in protocol design and provide input on study feasibility. They can assist in study recruitment and provide input on retention strategies. They can provide feedback on informed consent and processes, things like that, that we don't necessarily see on the regulatory side, although I think we probably see the benefits of them, but not necessarily directly tied back. But I think one of the challenges also is that really going back to the patient experience data that's submitted to FDA, I think that not all data is created equal. And this is one of the reasons for the guidance documents that I mentioned earlier. It's important that the data used by regulators to make decisions is representative and high quality. And if there's a lot of missing data, or the measures are used are not fit for purpose, or the methodology is lacking in some way, we can't use that data as much as we'd like. And so, and that's frustrating for us, and that's frustrating for everybody, because we understand the resources, both time and money, that go into gathering this data. So I think that, you know, I think that moving forward and being very transparent about what we're looking for at FDA through the guidance documents and through discussions, as well as kind of working with our industry colleagues, I think we are seeing a great broad adoption by medical product developers, and a lot of great work being done. And I think going forward, what we're seeing more of is patient preference information, specifically in the setting of benefit risk assessments. And I would say that my colleagues at the Center for Devices at FDA have a lot of work going on in this area and have issued guidance on preference studies. In CEDAR, we're still kind of gaining experience with that, but we do expect that the number of studies we're seeing will likely increase.
Thank you very much, Robin. And I think we have a question from Nick that was asking a little bit the status on patient engagement in devices or combined products, drug and devices. And I think you just touched on that. I'm not sure Nick has the full answer to it yet, but I think that's a piece of the answer. So I think one of the key next steps, and actually there are quite some questions to you about what are the concrete next steps to turn the EMA PE strategy for 2025 into reality. And so what are the next steps? And I think one of your key next steps is to address some guidances in terms of patient experience data. And I know that one of the things you want to do is to explore what we mean and what are all the different practices in terms of patient experience data. One of them that I might prefer is developing is a patient preference that Robin just mentioned. Can you tell us a little bit where do you plan to go, and what are the concrete next steps on your side?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's very good, because we made very clear which were our direction and our ambitions in the regulatory sense strategy And I think since we haven't seen maybe a real push on it, we have been maybe dragged very much by Brexit, and now we are in the middle of COVID-19, which is really putting a lot of strains and constraints to many activities. So as a follow-up to the strategy, you know, the agency is now working on the network strategy, which is the way that we are going to materialize the regulatory science strategy, and which will be the basis for the annual work plans in the coming years. And during the consultation, patient experience data came up one of the top priorities for all stakeholders, not only from patients, but also from industry, healthcare professionals, even from regulators. So it's clear that this is one of the priority areas where we would like to progress. And I think the main, let's say, the main activity we would like to start working is to try to define exactly what kind of EU guidance we can provide in this respect. Again, I think as Robin says, there is a clear trend that the patient experience data is welcome. It should, and more it's part of the applications that we receive, and we can see that. However, I think what is missing is maybe the quality. Maybe we lack methodological clarity about which is the best way to ensure that this data is generated to the highest quality and that it really has an impact and its usefulness when it comes to decision making and benefit risk decisions. So I think this is where hopefully we can move on. But I think, again, we need to maybe think more global. And also I come back to Lenita's comments that ICH now is working on this reflection paper, which is also framing the generation of patient experience data, which also covers elicitation and patient preferences. So maybe our plea is maybe that we will need to work together, and hopefully we can maybe give a very good framework and very good guidance on where we would like to. As you said, I think there is a need to have a good mapping. There is so much work out there, and that's maybe what internally we are starting to work on it. We need to be totally sure what kind of different initiatives are being taken at different parts. And then also I think it's important to have clear definitions about what patient experience data, which is not always well understood by the different parties. So I think we need to start working on these directions, and then hopefully we can encourage applicants and developers to ensure that when they are planning their developments, they really incorporate patient experience data, because we fully believe, and the EU regulators would like to give this signal that this is encouraged and this is welcome as part of the applications.
Thank you very much, Juan. So working together, it's music to my ears in the context of PFMD, but I'm sure that Lenita will like that statement too. So Lenita, when you hear that, and given the role of ICH, the harmonization role of ICH, what do you think about what you have heard from the three agencies that have shared their perspective on patient experience data?
Yes, well, I mean, we are talking, of course, about the three founding ICH regions, and as you can imagine, there are always some regulators or indeed industry behind any proposal that comes to ICH. And indeed, as regards the GCP renovation work, it has been work that has been very much prepared by the colleagues from FDA in collaboration with the colleagues from Europe and the EMA, and the same goes for the patient-focused drug development. And it is a little bit logical in the sense that some regions are more advanced in different areas, and usually those are the regions that are bringing forward possible topics for harmonization to ICH. And the challenge sometimes is, of course, also that one doesn't necessarily always want to bring in to ICH a topic for harmonization at a too early stage before there's enough experience in the domain. At the same time, if you come too late, in the meantime, you have different regions that would have developed different guidelines, and then it becomes very challenging, because usually regulators are not very happy to start changing the guidelines that they have, or guidances that they have developed. So I think in terms of patient involvement, I think we are on a very good track. As I said, intense collaboration takes place between these regulators, some of whom are around the table today at this panel. And I think it's, as I said, it would be very much welcome to have the patient input also formally through the ICH process by having an international patient organization at the table as an observer. But at the same time, we are organizing various workshops at regional level where we are striving to seek the input from various patients. And as we have heard both from Juan and Robin, I think it's an area where we could consider further harmonization. As you may know, some of the ICH guidances are really more about the format of submitting information. It might sometimes sound trivial, but it can really facilitate the work of the regulators and also allow comparisons between regulators if data and information is submitted in a harmonized format. And of course, also harmonizing methodology. And this could be helpful also for patients in that they would obtain guidance on how to collect that data and how to present it in a harmonized format to different regulators. But this is something I think where we will see potentially new guidelines also coming from ICH. And again, we will naturally make sure in today's transparent world that we will be seeking sufficient input from the patient and their various organizations so that they really feel that they have a say and can influence the outcome of those guidelines.
Thank you, Lenita. We are, so Juan will have to leave us in a few minutes, so I just would like to make a little bracket within our panel just to give the opportunity to Juan to answer a couple of questions. So Juan, I was scanning some questions, so you replied to some of them already, but there are 2 or 3 aspects that maybe you can quickly comment before you have to go. One element is the need to have yes, patient engagement, and you mentioned support. I think that's what generated the question from Natasha. You mentioned that we need patients that have the expertise and the support to give these inputs. And clearly the experience shows that it's on both sides of the equation. So I can talk that about the industry side that has done recently quite a shift in training all departments and everybody in the organization to be able to engage with the patient community, because actually what was happening is that patients were getting ready through trainings that have been mentioned in the chat, but the colleagues in industry that were not necessarily working in the patient advocacy departments were not necessarily ready to engage with patients. So how would you see that from an EMA point of view? So that's question 1. Then question 2, what is still the biggest obstacle to make patient engagement systematic? It was a question I have seen. And then finally, if you can say a quick word, I know that COVID-19 has a lot of impact on our health system, but what do you see is the biggest impact on patient engagement? So voilà, if you can at least start to answer this question, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm really sorry that I have to leave earlier, because this is really useful. But regarding training, I think training is more and more a priority for us. I think we're about to report about the latest years of, and I think when we look at the figures are very high. We have so many patients involved in so many different activities that I think without sufficient support, sometimes the interaction is lacking, let's say, an efficient procedure, an efficient way to do it. Very often patients are confronted with a regulatory setting, and sometimes we want to really have to extract the input from a patient who is completely unaware sometimes of the regulatory environment, because it gives really the insight that we are looking for, but it requires some kind of support from our side in order to ensure that they feel comfortable, that they fully understand the questions, the process, etc., and that they have sufficient background information. And this takes time and efforts and requires specialized staff to be able to do that. But I fully agree that the training is not taught only from the regulators to the patients. I think the training is some kind of internal element, and I fully agree. In order to be successful, And that's why we said before that over the years that EMA has been involved in patients, there has been a huge transformation on the perception from the regulators. And I have to admit that maybe 20 years ago, I mean, there was some kind of reluctancy from some regulators to have patients involved in these discussions, while this is no longer the case. I think there is a lot of acceptance now that patients really contribute very well to the whole, and to get to this point, we needed some kind of support. We needed some kind of professional people working on patient engagement. And I think this is really critical. You need to have specialized people dealing with that, because sometimes there is a tendency to think that patient engagement is, it's an ancillary activity. You don't need specialized people for dealing with this. And I think this is what makes the difference. So fully agree, training is critical, and we need to develop our training strategy, different methodologies, but it's not only for the patients, it's also internally for the organization. And it's very often, for example, when you see in the committees how the chair of the committee really manages the meeting to ensure that the patients can contribute, etc. This is so critical and makes such a huge difference. You ask about which is the recipe, or which is the biggest obstacle?
Right? Yes, exactly.
Yeah, biggest obstacle for systematic involvement, and I think the limit is resources for us. But this is based on our experience. I think we haven't identified yet any activity in which the patients cannot contribute and in which they will make an added value to the activity. I think it's a matter that you have to make priorities, because maybe you don't have the luxury to involve patients everywhere. And I think a good example of that is the public hearing. Public hearing was a very, let's say, expensive exercise with a lot of resource investment. And there were some comments on the feedback that some people said, it's a pity that for every safety review, you cannot do this, because the insights, the value of what we got was really excellent. But of course, you cannot apply such a sophisticated instrument to every safety review, because it wouldn't be efficient. So I think it's a matter of priorities, it's a matter of resources, and it's a matter to finding the balance. But I don't think so there is a limit to it. It's just how you want to really find this balance between what you invest and what you get. And then finally about COVID, and I think COVID is maybe the biggest public health crisis we have had in this century, definitely. And I think it's more critical than ever that we have the patients and the healthcare professionals on board. And I think the problem is that because it's a crisis, everyone is rushing. We have a lot of preparedness, and I think patient engagement is part of this preparedness. But we cannot forget that even if we want to really progress very quickly, because we want to give a very effective and a very quick response to the pandemic, involving with the stakeholders to remain open, transparent is critical more than ever, and we are trying to apply this as much as we can. You may be aware that in terms of transparency, for example, we are applying special measures at EMA to ensure that the transparency which we are going to give to COVID-19 products has never seen before in EMA, and I think there is no precedent for that. But also in terms of public engagement, and giving an example, at the level of the task force for COVID, which is the platform we are using to deal with all the discussions about COVID and all the information which is coming. We have now representatives of patients and healthcare professionals, as we have for other committees, just to ensure that there is an open channel that they can influence, etc. And then we will need to develop different activities where they will be involved. We are thinking of finding mechanisms to keep people up to date. We are developing specific information, which we are doing user testing it with patients and involving patient organizations, etc., to try to explain the development of these new vaccines, the role that regulators are taking in the pandemic, etc. So there is a numerous activities by which we find it critical, and I'm very pleased to say that high management at the agency considers critical that patients and healthcare professionals are fully involved. If we really want to respond to this crisis, we cannot do it in isolation, even knowing that it implies maybe extra effort, extra work, and doesn't mean that the activities are going to be less efficient.
Thank you very much, Ron. I will free you now. So we'll miss you for the next part of the discussion. What we'll do, because there are already some questions still for you, and there will be more, I suspect. So we will keep all the questions and share that with you and see on how we can continue as part of the patient engagement open forum series, continue that discussion in the future. So a big thank you to you, and good luck for your next activities today.
Thank you very much.
So I'm continuing the discussion, and I just want to reconnect to the flow of the meeting. So on COVID now. Of course, we can talk about COVID-19 and patient engagement for COVID-19 activities. So that's very important. If we can have one aspect of the discussion on that, but also what potentially COVID, the crisis of COVID is showing are the pitfalls for patient engagement, where we have actually pushed patient engagement aside because of the crisis and thinking patient engagement was too complicated. So I just wanted maybe to start with Robin. So if you can comment on these two aspects. So what FDA is doing to bring patient at the table in the context of COVID-19, but what are the issues that are highlighted by the crisis that are not COVID-19 specific, but are actually stopping patient engagement to happen further, especially now?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question, and I think that I think that it's very relevant, obviously, right now. You know, I think from a methodologic standpoint, we're facing some challenges because we have all of these clinical outcome assessments and other assessments, and I mean, it happens outside of just clinical outcome assessments, but we've had to kind of shift maybe how we're doing some of those assessments and look at the potential of introducing bias if we're collecting measures in a way that's different than we previously collected them and things like that. And so you know, FDA has put out as part of the COVID-19 clinical trials guidance kind of a cross-center thinking on how to adjust clinical outcome assessments and things like that. And so we're seeing that's question 13 in the guidance at the end. And then we're seeing, we did just also put out a guidance about collecting symptoms for COVID-19 that really kind of focuses a lot on patient-reported outcome measures. But as far as our patient engagement activities, it's been very interesting. I mean, you'll see that I'm sure some people on the meeting are aware that we've shifted some of our patient-focused drug development meetings to a fully virtual setting. A lot of the externally led patient-focused drug development meetings have shifted to a virtual setting. And I think that there's pluses and minuses to these experiences. We certainly have a more diverse audience attending than we had previously. We're getting a more global, but even within the United States, kind of across the country. We had a meeting at the end of August on our standard core COA grant program, and we had a panel of patients that really kind of talked to us, or a panel including patients that really talked to us about the implications of COVID-19 to them and their patient engagement and things like that. And certainly there's challenges with trying to do things quickly and efficiently, and what gets cut out. And we would hope that, you know, patient input wouldn't be part of that, but obviously, people are making tough choices right now. But we also heard from some of our patients on the panel that COVID-19 has actually they're relatively homebound due to their condition, and COVID-19 has really offered them, because everything is much more virtual now, an opportunity to participate more fully. And so I think that, you know, we're seeing places where we can take advantage of kind of this shift to a more virtual environment, and then places where we're kind of, you know, losing some of that as well.
Thank you very much. So, and Daisaku, if we look at Japan now, what would be the answer to the same question on what you do concretely now to face COVID-19 and involve patients to do so? And maybe what have you seen is putting a brake on more patient engagement on maybe other drugs in the approval process. So what would be the status in Japan?
Yes, thank you very much, Nicholas. And so let me explain the situation in Japan. And this is very positive side of COVID-19, and because our meeting online is become become a de facto. So the online meeting provides more opportunities to join the meeting from patient side, and in the Japanese situation, each patient group is very small, and their advocacy is very small. But in online, we can connect these people, and it is more easier than before. So I think this may be a good opportunity for the patient groups to participate in the regulatory activities nowadays. And also in the clinical settings, the online healthcare has been developing and widely spreading now in Japan. And this will affect also in the clinical trials, and the remote information collection from patient will be progressing in the clinical trial setting now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Daisaku. Lenita, would you have any ICS perspective on patient engagement in COVID-19?
No, not really. I think that all the different regulators are fully busy with all the efforts ongoing to review vaccine candidates and so forth. There could be a potential role in the future also for ICH, perhaps in the context of a pandemic or a health emergency situation, for example, in terms of possibilities to develop more rapidly international guidance. But these are just I think these are early days. I think there will be lessons learned from the existing exercise. We have to also be very, very careful because there's already now the public perception. There's concerns that these COVID-19 vaccines about whether they will meet the necessary safety and efficacy requirements. So I think we need to approach this in a very cautious manner. But I do not exclude the possibility that there might be a role for a more fast-track development of international guidance in the context of health emergencies in the future once we have overcome the current challenges, and this is certainly the situation is not over yet, but something that certainly ICH is keeping an eye on. We know that another international organization, the ICMRA, which is the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, with the heads of medicines regulators, have been very active in this area of COVID-19. It has been absolutely critical to share information between the different regulators, and I believe also certain collaboration there between ICMRA and WHO. So we certainly don't want to duplicate what is being done by others, but many of the regulators are, of course, both members of ICMRA and of ICH. So we will have to see if ICH could play a role in the future in this area.
Thank you, Lenita. So we'll move to the Q&A session now, and I will start building on some of the questions I have seen. But please continue to shoot questions if you want. So clearly there is a question about how to actually so the first thing is like, how patients should be prepared to engage with regulators. And so that's maybe a first question to answer. But then if we can go a bit deeper, because we have seen in Europe some programs like Ppi, where there is really a training program which is very robust. It's an investment from the patient side to actually go through the training. What we have seen is that it's one thing to build a capability, but then what is the capacity to actually answer the needs of the regulators and the resource? I think Juan was making the point that on the resource, I'm not sure he was making the point from an agency and or from a patient organization point of view. It was probably both. But if you have to give an advice to patient organizations on how they come and engage with you, what would be your advice? And so maybe Robin, if we can start with you, that would be great.
Sure. So I think first I wanted to touch on some resources that are not necessarily FDA resources that I think have been really valuable to people as they're kind of engaging in patient-focused drug development, both on the patient side as well as on the industry side. And so the Clinical Trial Transformation Initiative, CTTI, has a lot of great resources out there, as well as the PCORI, the Patient-Centered Clinical, I'm going to mess this up, Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Initiative, I want to say, here in the US, also sponsored the development of a really helpful guide for both the researchers and patients through SWOG, what used to be known as the Southwest Oncology Group. And they also have a lot of great resources that kind of help patients become more comfortable with kind of interactions, and also help drug companies really, or developers, researchers really understand kind of the helpful role that patients can play. And so that is maybe not as in depth as some of the training that you just mentioned, but is also very helpful. And I think for FDA, we have a whole patient engagement kind of site, and patients are welcome to, and patient organizations are welcome to reach out to FDA for specific FDA engagement through that. It's in our Office of the Commissioner level, so it can kind of, depending on what the engagement that you're looking for is, it can be kind of directed in the correct direction, because I know that before I worked for FDA and I tried to navigate the site, it can be a bit overwhelming. So if you can start at the patient site, there's very good communication. But really just kind of understanding, I think what's very helpful for everybody to understand is what is within kind of the scope of the organization and what is not within the scope of the organization. And just being able to understand kind of what we can do and what we can't do. For example, FDA doesn't develop drugs. And so like these are things we can try and incentivize people, but just understanding kind of what's in the control and not within the control is also helpful. But we certainly want to hear from patient groups.
Thank you, Robin. Daisaku, what would be your recommendation to patient organization in Japan if they want to engage with PMDA?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I think our challenge is to educate the patient group, and also we have more equal footing relationship with the patient organization in Japan. So in that sense, we collaborate with the Japanese patient group to translate the UPATI's guidance in Japanese. And this is our first step to do so. And also we provide some education opportunities for the patient to be more proactive. So for the future, this is our perspective. Thank you.
This is great. And so some of the recent work in patient engagement really start to clarify the difference between the patient experience that could be shared with from any patients with the condition or caregiver, and the patient expertise, which is when the patient has developed a specific expertise to understand the research, to understand the drug development process, to understand the system. So when we talk about expertise and the fact that you have to invest in your own expertise and your personal development to do so, if you are part of a patient organization or not, what would be the status? And it's just a checkpoint at this stage. So what would be the status? Is there compensation from your agencies when you work together with these patient experts? And maybe Robin or Daisaku to start with.
So I can start. If we have, when we work together with experts, as far as people who are patient representatives on our advisory committees, they are compensated as special government employees, just like everybody else who is part of the advisory committee.
Great, thank you. It's a very nice recognition of the role of patients, like anybody else at the table. What would be the status about that, Daisaku, in Japan?
Yes, in the PMDA and the ministry's advisory committees, we have a seat for the patient group to participate. These people are relatively expert and professionals, and they are very well trained and educated to know the regulations of drug in Japan. So, but it is quite sometimes difficult to difficult to get in these kind of people in Japan, and these very educated and educated people with expertise is very limited. So this is the reason why I told that the education is challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisaku. And indeed, we can see that. And one of the work we would like to bring to the table with PFMD is to really find a model, a sustainable model for patient organization, for patient experts, and for patients that have no expertise but still want to contribute, where they actually it's a sustainable model and not just considered like a hobby on the side of other professional activities. So maybe because I see we are getting to the end of our session, there was this question about what would be the biggest obstacle. And so if we take a quick step back, it's obvious that all stakeholders are starting to move in the same direction. It's obvious that, and we have seen the question earlier to Juan, like what are the next steps? We know that actually sponsors would like more clarity, as much as regulators would like to make sure that the data they receive is very robust. So Lenita, you as ICH and from your perspective of harmonization, what would you state is the biggest challenge moving forward, or the biggest obstacle, and the one that ICH would like to address in the next few years?
Well, I think probably the biggest obstacle is the fact that the patient community is very diverse. I mean, we have different types of patients, and the way they interact with the regulators is very different in the different regions. So how to bring all of that together in a global format, and to, if we are in the future to consider some guidance in this area, this guidance should be meaningful and useful to everybody. But I believe that the direction of travel is the same everywhere. And we've just heard from our Japanese colleague as well about all the developments going on in Japan to involve patients. It's just some regulators are probably more advanced than others, but they can, the less experienced ones can certainly learn from the experiences of the more advanced ones. And I would just like to take this opportunity, because I saw in the chat a few questions about the eligibility criteria for international patient organizations in ICH. So let me just clarify that. First of all, any international organization representing patients, be it patients in general or a subcategory of patients, is welcome to submit an application for observership. Information is available on the ICH website, and there's actually also a separate form that you can fill in. And the eligibility criteria are spelled out as well. So the most important criteria is that the organization would need to be international. So it would need to have a global constituency. And so essentially, let's say, in many instances, I could imagine it would be an international global umbrella organization that may then have affiliates in different regions. It could have also individual patients as members, but I would imagine that they probably have national or regional organizations rather as members. So it would need to really be international. And the reason why we insist on this point is simply that we already have quite a few observers around the table. More applications are coming in, and there's always a limit to how many people you can effectively attend a meeting. The ICH meetings nowadays are about 500 people. all in all, because we have a number of expert working groups that are meeting in parallel as well with the management committee and the assembly. So that's why those meetings are relatively big. So I would just invite any international patient organization to visit the website. If you have any questions, you can contact the ICH Secretariat. They're very helpful. They're based in Geneva. And when you have looked at the eligibility criteria, if something is not clear, don't hesitate to reach out, ask questions, fill in the form, and that form will then be assessed by the management committee, which will be issuing a recommendation to the assembly. So as I said, we do realize that any international patient organization, it's difficult for them to pretend to speak on behalf of all patients necessarily, and that's why I would like to emphasize again the importance that the ICH is continuing to reach out to various stakeholders, including patient organizations, also at regional level. Also, we have to take into account that there are regional differences, and so, for example, in the context of the Gcp renovation, I mentioned already various meetings that have taken place in Europe and in the United States and elsewhere. So this is very important, and whenever draft ICH guidelines are being adopted and also final guidelines, there is a public consultation process organized by all the regulatory members of ICH in their own constituencies, but also by the ICH Secretariat. And this is also one way for patient organizations that may not qualify to become observers in ICH to submit their views and comments and thus try to influence the content of those guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lenita, and I'm sure you will have plenty of application from the audience. Robin, biggest obstacle moving forward. So what was mentioning from the EMA point of view, the resources. So what would be your perspective at the FDA and how maybe you plan to address it?
Thank you. First, I want to build just a little bit on what Lenita just said, because I'm on the ICH E8 work group, and I know that we held the public stakeholder meeting in the US, and we learned a huge amount from our stakeholders that provided feedback for us there, as well as we're going through all of the questions. And I want to reaffirm to everybody that we look at every single question that's put in from across the world when we're revising the ICH documents from draft to final. We look at every single question or comment, we discuss it as a group. And so there is a lot of opportunity, even if to provide feedback, even if you're not part of a patient group that is, able to join ICH. There's certainly plenty. Please provide us with the feedback, because we do look at every single comment and consider everything. But moving forward to the resources, I think I would have to echo what Juan said, which is really just resources. I mean, I think that everybody that we have, I feel like there's a consensus that patient engagement is important and patient-focused drug development is important, but I think that one of the challenges is that it's not necessarily fast, and it's not very necessary, and particularly as we're building up our processes and our systems and developing our methodologies and our guidance, it takes work. And I think for us, one of the larger challenges is the resources. And then just also, I think we've seen in the last few years a lot of really helpful literature that supports the benefit of patient-focused drug development also to medical product developers, both in a kind of, this is a good idea because it's a good idea, but also because there's some evidence developing that this saves time and money on protocol revisions. It saves time and money on people enrolling in protocols, because you learn earlier when you have patients at the table, like that maybe some of your inclusion/exclusion criteria are just not realistic. So I think that there's an element of time that we just need to give this as we kind of build up the evidence to support it. But mostly, I think resources are our biggest challenge as well.
And you mentioned, just to be clear, internal resources, also resource on the patient community side. Just to make sure I'm clear on that.
So I think that's both. I think that you know, I mean, internal resources are certainly a limitation, but also I mean, I think we have a lot of very, very active patient communities, but I think that because we have so much uptake from drug industry, there's also a lot of interest that they're getting from the medical product developers. And so I can really only speak specifically on my part to our internal resources, but I have heard kind of anecdotally that, you know, there's a lot of other resource challenges for patient groups as well. But I don't think that should discourage us. I just think it's something that we need to be aware of and kind of figure out a way to deal with.
Thank you very much. And so, Daisaku, what would be, in the current state of patient engagement in Japan, what is the biggest obstacle and how you would like to address it?
Yeah, thank you very much. I also echo resources. This is both internal resources and also the resources of patient side. And we PMDA is a relatively smaller agency than FDA, and we have only 1,000 people working here. And we are very seriously engaged in the drug review, and we have a lot of work to do within the time frame to be kept. So in their very busy daily life, we need to communicate with patient, and also we expect to educate, provide opportunity of education to the patient. And so this is one of the obstacles. And also it is very difficult to find very good patient. Good patient is not good word, but the patient who has expertise, who can tell in professional words and what is their patient outcome and in the scientific world. So I think both sides of resources will be the spiral, and we need to turn this spiral in the positive way. But this is also a resource problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisaku. And when we are getting to the end of our panel, it's clear that we are, as mentioned by Lenita, there is a kind of same direction of travel for all agencies and a willingness to actually observe each other and work together. So that's very important. I witness on all stakeholder side, like researchers, industry, regulators, this movement and this global movement. And I'm convinced personally that one of the driving force for change is the regulatory side of things. And so it's very inspiring to actually hear your thoughts and your point of view and what's coming next. That's really influenced the whole system. One simple example is that the experience data generated for regulators might be very useful for payers as well. And so that's one piece of work that I know is shaping in patient engagement. So thank you very much for all your insights today. Actually, this is part, so it's a patient engagement open forum session. This is one of the regulatory sessions we had from the beginning, and this will continue. And so the role of the patient engagement open forum is really to go deep into the patient engagement issue, and not only to present about it, but also to start discuss and shape the future of patient engagement. I'm mentioning this now because actually we will continue to work on these discussions. We'll continue the discussion with our panelists. We will continue other discussions in patient engagement. And actually we are working on patient experience data, mapping, evidence, decision process, and so on. So that's, please stay tuned to the Patient Engagement Open Forum and to the agenda of the meeting coming early next year, because more will come about all these topics. So thank you very much to my panelists. You were great, and it was fantastic insights. And I hope to meet you soon and the audience as well in the next PEOF forum. So thank you very much and have a great end of the day for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very much.
you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Can we move in a discussion just with the panelists?